The scent of burning sage hung in the air, mingling with the sour odor of fear that seemed to permeate every corner of our small village home. Outside, the autumn wind howled against wooden shutters that had long since stopped keeping drafts at bay. My mother's hands trembled as she wove the ceremonial braids into my hair, each tug against my scalp a painful reminder of what was to come. "Hold still, Ilara," she whispered, her voice lacking any warmth that might have comforted me. The claiming ceremony requires perfection. I stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror propped against the wall. At 22, I was 5 years older than most girls presented at the annual ceremony. My pale skin seemed almost translucent in the dim candlelight, dark circles shadowing eyes that had seen too many disappointments. 5 years of being overlooked by potential mates. 5 years of watching younger girls chosen while I remained behind, unwanted and increasingly shameful to my family. "Do you think anyone will choose me this time?" I asked, immediately regretting the vulnerability in my question. My mother's fingers stilled against my scalp. The silence stretched between us like a living thing before she sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. "Your father has made arrangements," she finally said, avoiding my eyes in the mirror. "Should you remain unchosen again?" The implications of her words settled over me like a shroud. Arrangements. The euphemism wasn't lost on me. For families desperate enough, there were always options beyond our pack's borders. Rumors of human trafficking disguised as employment opportunities or arranged marriages weren't uncommon, especially for infertile she-wolves like me. My hand instinctively reached for the small wooden pendant hanging around my neck. My grandmother had pressed it into my palm on her deathbed 7 years ago, her gnarled fingers closing mine around the carved wolf. "Your worth isn't in your womb, little one," she had whispered, her voice already fading. "Remember that when the world tries to tell you otherwise." I'd worn it every day since, this small talisman of defiance against a society that valued fertility above all else. My thumb traced the familiar grooves as my mother finished the last braid. "There," she said, stepping back to assess her work. "At least you'll look presentable." The unspoken words hung between us. "Even if your body is broken." My father appeared in the doorway, his imposing frame blocking what little light filtered in from the main room. Once, I'd been his pride, his firstborn. Now I was merely a burden, a failed investment. "It's time," he announced, his voice flat. "The carriages are arriving at the ceremonial grounds." I rose on unsteady legs, smoothing down the simple white dress that would mark me as available for claiming. My mother adjusted the ceremonial red sash around my waist, a symbol of fertility that felt like a cruel joke against my body. "Ilara," my father said, his voice lowering as my mother left the room. "You understand what's at stake tonight." It wasn't a question. We both knew. 3 moons ago, I'd overheard him negotiating with a traitor from the Eastern Territories, a man known for finding positions for unclaimed she-wolves. The sum mentioned had been substantial, enough to cover my parents' mounting debts and secure my younger sister's future. "I understand," I replied, keeping my eyes downcast as was expected. "Good," he nodded, his hand briefly touching my shoulder in what might have been affection, or perhaps just a final acknowledgement before he sold his daughter. "Then make yourself appealing. Your future depends on it." The walk to the ceremonial grounds stretched longer than in previous years. Families lined the path, whispering behind cupped hands as I passed. Everyone knew this was my last chance. At 22, I was already considered past prime claiming age, and with no signs of fertility, my value diminished with each passing season. "There goes the barren one," a child's voice carried on the wind, silenced quickly by a mother's harsh reprimand. But not before the words found their target. I kept my eyes fixed on the path ahead, clutching my grandmother's pendant through the thin fabric of my dress. The ceremonial grounds came into view, a large clearing surrounded by ancient oak trees. At its center stood the claiming stone, a massive granite altar where each available female would stand to be assessed by potential mates. Torches illuminated the gathering darkness, casting long shadows across faces both familiar and strange. Our pack had opened its borders for the ceremony, allowing unmated males from neighboring territories to participate. It meant more potential matches, but also more eyes to witness my humiliation should I remain unchosen again. The Alpha's daughter, Lyra, caught my eye from where she stood with the other eligible females. Unlike me, her participation was merely ceremonial, a way to honor tradition before her arranged mating to a neighboring Alpha's son. Her lips curved in a smirk that spoke volumes. We had once been friends, as children, before biology had separated us into distinct categories, the valuable and the worthless. "Candidates, form your line," called out Elder Marin, her ancient voice carrying across the hushed gathering. I took my place at the end of the line, behind 13 other girls, all younger, all with cheeks flushed with excitement rather than shame. The scent of their nervousness was tinged with hope. Mine carried only resignation. The ceremony began with ritualistic prayers to the moon goddess, asking her blessing upon the unions that would form this night. I mouthed the words by rote, having heard them so many times they had lost all meaning. Instead, I found myself scanning the gathered males, wondering which would be considered an acceptable match by my father. None of the prime specimens, certainly. Perhaps one of the older widowers, or a low-ranking pack member desperate enough to overlook my deficiency. One by one, the girls before me were called to stand upon the claiming stone. One by one, they were chosen. Some by multiple suitors who then competed for the honor. Families cheered, agreements were made, ceremonial bloodletting sealed the initial bonds, and then it was my turn. "Ilara, daughter of Gareth and Maris, step forward," Elder Marin called, her eyes not unkind as they met mine. The walk to the claiming stone felt like wading through deep water, every step requiring tremendous effort. The silence that fell over the gathering was deafening compared to the cheers that had preceded each previous claiming. I kept my gaze lowered as I climbed the 3 stone steps and took my place atop the ancient granite. "Ilara presents herself for claiming," Elder Marin announced. "She brings the wisdom of 22 summers and the loyalty of her bloodline. Who would claim her as mate?" The silence stretched. I counted heartbeats. 10, 20, 30, before daring to lift my eyes. The gathered males stood impassive, some averting their gaze, others whispering to companions. Not a single step forward was taken. Elder Marin cleared her throat. "I ask again, who would claim Ilara as mate?" From the corner of my eye, I saw my father shift his weight, his hand moving to touch the inner pocket of his ceremonial coat where, I knew, rested the contract he had already prepared with the Eastern trader. And then, a disturbance at the edge of the ceremonial grounds. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, starting at the outer edges and quickly becoming gasps of surprise. The crowd parted like water before a stone. I raised my eyes fully for the first time, curiosity temporarily overcoming shame. Through the parted crowd strode 3 figures. The central one walked with the unmistakable authority of an alpha, his broad shoulders draped in a cloak of deepest black, adorned with silver symbols I didn't recognize. Flanking him were 2 warriors, their posture alert, hands resting casually on the hilts of ceremonial daggers, but it was the man in the center who held my attention. Even from atop the claiming stone, I could feel the power radiating from him in waves. He was older than me by perhaps a decade, his face bearing the hardened planes of one who commanded respect, rather than requested it. A scar bisected his right eyebrow, trailing down to the cheekbone in a pale line against tanned skin. His hair, as black as his cloak, was pulled back severely from a face that seemed carved from stone. Elder Marin dropped to one knee, a gesture I had never seen her make to anyone. "Alpha King Thorn," she said, her voice pitched to Carrie. "We are honored by your unexpected presence." "Alpha King?" The title sent a shock through me. Everyone knew of the Alpha King who ruled the Northern Territories, a coalition of packs so vast it was said his lands took a full moon cycle to cross. But he was almost mythical, a figure of power discussed in hushed tones around fires, not someone who appeared at small pack ceremonies. The gathered crowd followed Elder Marin's lead, dropping to their knees in waves until only I remained standing, frozen atop the claiming stone. The Alpha King's eyes, a startling amber that seemed to glow in the torchlight, lifted to meet mine. The intensity of his gaze pinned me in place, making it impossible to look away or follow protocol by lowering myself in submission. "I've come for the claiming," his voice carried easily across the silent grounds, deep and resonant in a way that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. Elder Marin rose cautiously. "Of course, Alpha King. We would be honored to restart the ceremony for—" "That won't be necessary," he interrupted, his gaze never leaving mine. "I've already found what I came for." And then he did the unthinkable. The Alpha King strode forward, his powerful form cutting through the kneeling crowd until he stood directly before the claiming stone. This close, I could see flecks of gold in his amber eyes, could smell the scent of pine and winter that clung to his skin. "I claim this one," he announced, his voice leaving no room for question or challenge. "Ilara, daughter of Gareth and Maris." The collective gasp that rose from the gathered pack was like a sudden gust of wind. I stood frozen, certain I had misheard, or that this was some elaborate, cruel joke. The Alpha King extended his hand toward me, palm up, revealing a silver ceremonial blade. "Do you accept my claim?" he asked, though it scarcely sounded like a question. Over his shoulder, I caught sight of my father's face, a mask of shock and naked calculation, as he processed this unexpected turn. The Eastern trader, who had been lurking at the edges of the gathering, melted back into the shadows, his transaction evaporating before his eyes. I should have felt relief. Instead, suspicion crawled up my spine. Why would the Alpha King, ruler of the Northern Territories, claim a barren she-wolf from a minor pack? What use could I possibly be to him? His hand remained extended, the ceremonial blade catching the firelight. Behind him I could see the faces of my pack members, some shocked, some envious, all watching to see what I would do. My fingers closed around my grandmother's pendant, seeking its comfort one last time. "Your worth isn't in your womb," her voice whispered in my memory. Perhaps this was my chance to discover what worth I might have beyond the broken parts of me. I placed my trembling hand in his. The moment my skin touched his, a jolt of electricity shot up my arm. His hand engulfed mine completely, warm and calloused. The hand of a warrior, not a figurehead who merely commanded from afar. I fought to keep my face impassive as he drew the ceremonial blade across my palm, a shallow cut that beaded with blood almost instantly. Without hesitation, he turned the blade and made a matching cut across his own palm, then pressed our wounds together. The traditional blood binding, performed countless times through generations of our kind, suddenly felt intimate and dangerous in a way I hadn't anticipated. "Blood to blood," he said, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. "Life to life." The formal words of claiming hung in the air between us as our blood mingled. According to tradition, this preliminary bond would remain in place until the mating ceremony could be performed under the full moon, a ceremony that, in my case, would be purely symbolic. The thought sent a wave of shame through me. "Alpha King," I began, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. "There's something you should know." Later, he cut me off, his tone brooking no argument. His eyes scanned the gathered crowd before returning to mine with an intensity that stole my breath. "This isn't the place." Elder Marin approached cautiously, her weathered face a mask of practiced diplomacy that couldn't quite hide her shock. "The moon goddess blesses this claiming," she announced, raising her gnarled hands toward the night sky where the waxing moon hung like a silver pendant. "Let it be recorded that Ilara, daughter of Gareth and Maris, has been claimed by Alpha King Thorn of the Northern Territories." A murmur rippled through the crowd, part awe, part disbelief. I caught sight of Lyra's face, her perfect features contorted with confusion, and unless I was mistaken, a flash of anger. Next to her, my parents stood frozen, my father's expression calculating while my mother's hand covered her mouth in shock. "The binding ceremony will take place at the next full moon," the Alpha King announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the clearing. "Until then, she comes under my protection and travels with me to the Northern Territories." "Tonight?" The word escaped me before I could stop it, earning a sharp look from Elder Marin and a raised eyebrow from the Alpha King. "Tonight," he confirmed, releasing my hand, but remaining close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Gather what belongings you need. We depart within the hour." My mind reeled. An hour to pack up my entire existence. An hour to say goodbye to the only home I'd ever known, a home that had never truly embraced me, but familiar nonetheless. An hour before I would leave with this stranger who, for reasons I couldn't fathom, had claimed me as his own. "May I speak with my family before we depart?" I asked, forcing strength into my voice that I didn't feel. Something flickered across his face, a hardening around the eyes, a tightening of his jaw, before he nodded once. "1 hour," he repeated. "My guards will escort you home and then to my caravan." The walk back to my family's dwelling passed in a blur. Whispers followed in our wake, pack members who had spent years ignoring my existence now burning with curiosity. The 2 guards flanked me silently, their presence making it clear that I was already no longer just Alara, the barren disappointment, but something else entirely, property of the Alpha King. My parents walked several paces ahead, their backs rigid with tension. Not once did they look back to see if I followed. When we reached our home, my father finally turned to the guards. "Surely there's no need for you to enter," he said, his tone carefully respectful, but underlaid with the authority he held within our pack. "We only wish for a private moment with our daughter before she leaves." The taller of the 2 guards, a man with a face like carved granite and eyes that missed nothing, shook his head. "The Alpha King's orders were clear. We are to remain with his claimed mate at all times." His claimed mate. The words hung in the air between us, as foreign and unexpected as if they'd been spoken in another language entirely. Inside our small home, I moved mechanically to gather my few possessions. There wasn't much. Some clothes, a book of legends my grandmother had given me, a small carved box containing a lock of her hair. My life, it seemed, could be packed away in a single bag. "Ilara," my mother finally spoke, her voice tight with some emotion I couldn't identify. "Do you understand what's happened?" I paused in my packing, looking up to find both my parents watching me with expressions that mixed calculation with something that might have been concern. "The Alpha King has claimed me," I said simply, stating the obvious because I had no other answers to give. My father paced the small confines of the room, shooting wary glances at the guards who maintained their position by the door. "This changes everything," he muttered, more to himself than to me or my mother. "Why would he choose me?" I asked, voicing the question that had been circling in my mind since the moment the Alpha King had extended his hand on the claiming stone. "He must know I swallowed hard, forcing the word past the lump in my throat. "Baron." My mother flinched at the word, but my father's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Perhaps he doesn't know," he said slowly. "Our pack is small, isolated. It's possible word of your condition hasn't reached the Northern Territories." A cold weight settled in my stomach. "You think he claimed me under false pretenses?" The idea that I would be rejected again once the Alpha King learned the truth was almost more than I could bear. "Or perhaps he knows and doesn't care," my mother offered, her voice softening slightly. "They say the Alpha King already has heirs from his first mate. Perhaps he seeks only companionship now." The first mate. Of course. I'd heard the stories, as had everyone in the 5 territories. How the Alpha King's mate and young son had been killed in an attack 3 years ago. How he had hunted down those responsible with a cold fury that had become legendary. How he had ruled alone since then, turning away all political matches suggested by his advisors. "Whatever his reasons," my father said, stepping closer and lowering his voice, "this is an opportunity for our family, for our pack." His eyes gleamed with ambition. "You must secure your position, Alara. Make yourself indispensable to him." I stared at him, the magnitude of his words sinking in. Just hours ago, he had been prepared to sell me to a traitor from the East. Now he saw me as a potential conduit to power. "And if he rejects me when he learns the truth?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My father's expression hardened. "Then you'd better make sure he doesn't learn it until it's too late for him to change his mind." I turned away, unable to bear the naked calculation in his eyes. My fingers found my grandmother's pendant, seeking its comfort. What would she have advised in this moment? To lie to survive, or to face rejection with dignity? "It's time," the guard announced from the doorway. "The Alpha King awaits." I shouldered my small bag and turned to face my parents. For a moment, I thought my mother might embrace me, her arms lifting slightly before dropping back to her sides. "Make us proud," my father said, his hand heavy on my shoulder for a brief moment. They were the last words he spoke to me. No declarations of love, no reassurances that I would always have a home to return to should things go wrong. Just a final command to serve their interests, even as I was led away to an uncertain future. Outside, the night had deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky above. The village was eerily quiet, though I could feel eyes watching from darkened windows as I was escorted to where 3 enormous black carriages waited at the edge of our territory. Guards stood at attention around the perimeter, their posture alert despite the lateness of the hour. The lead carriage door opened as I approached, revealing the Alpha King seated inside, his powerful frame making the spacious interior seem somehow smaller. He watched my approach with those unsettling amber eyes, his face revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Your belongings?" he asked, noting my single small bag. "This is all," I replied, fighting the urge to apologize for having so little to bring to this unexpected union. He nodded once and extended his hand to help me into the carriage. I hesitated only briefly before placing my fingers in his, allowing him to draw me up and into the dimly lit interior. The door closed behind me with a soft click that somehow felt like the ceiling of a tomb. We sat in silence as the carriage lurched into motion, the steady rhythm of horses' hooves marking our departure from everything I had ever known. I kept my eyes fixed on my lap, hyper-aware of the man seated across from me, a stranger who now held complete power over my fate. "You're afraid," he stated after several minutes had passed, his deep voice startling in the quiet. I lifted my gaze to find him studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Wouldn't you be?" I countered, surprising myself with my boldness. Something that might have been amusement flickered across his face before disappearing behind that inscrutable mask. "Most would be honored to be chosen by the Alpha King. Most would understand why they were chosen," I replied, my fingers tightening around the pendant at my neck. "I don't have that luxury." He leaned forward slightly, the movement bringing his scent closer. Pine, winter, and something uniquely male that made my wolf stir in a way I hadn't experienced before. "Does there need to be a reason beyond what I want?" The arrogance in his tone sparked an unexpected flare of anger in my chest. "When what you want is a barren she-wolf from a minor pack, yes, I think reasons matter quite a lot." The words escaped before I could stop them, hanging in the air between us like a gauntlet thrown. I tensed, waiting for his anger, for the rejection that would surely follow my outburst. Instead, he leaned back against the plush seat, his expression unreadable in the dim light of the carriage's single lantern. "So you decided to announce your perceived flaw immediately. Interesting strategy." "Not a perceived flaw," I said quietly, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "A reality I've lived with for 5 years. And who diagnosed this reality?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Our pack healer, my mother. 5 years of monthly disappointments." I swallowed hard, hating the tremor in my voice. "Take your pick." "I prefer to make my own assessments," he replied, a hint of steel entering his tone. "And I did not claim you for your womb, Ilara." The use of my name sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. "Then why did you claim me?" For a long moment, he studied me in silence, his amber eyes reflecting the flickering lamplight. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to a register that seemed to resonate in my very bones. "Because when I walked into that clearing, every instinct I possess, alpha, wolf, and man, recognized something in you. Something that called to me in a way I haven't felt in 3 years. He paused, his gaze never leaving mine. Something I never expected to feel again. My breath caught in my throat. "What did you recognize?" "That remains to be seen," he replied, effectively closing that line of conversation. "We have a 3-day journey to the Northern Territories. You should rest while you can." As if on cue, fatigue washed over me, the emotional exhaustion of the day catching up all at once. I leaned my head against the carriage window, watching the familiar landscape of my pack's territory recede into darkness. "What should I call you?" I asked softly, realizing I had no idea how to address the man who had claimed me. "My name is Thorn," he said after a moment. "In public, protocol demands you address me as Alpha King or my lord. In private, my name will suffice." Thorn. The name suited him. Sharp, dangerous, unyielding. "And what will you call me?" I asked, my eyelids growing heavy despite my determination to remain alert. "Mine," he replied simply. "I will call you mine." The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened me. Instead, it wrapped around me like a warm blanket as I drifted toward sleep. My last conscious thought a wonder at how quickly life could change. From unwanted to claimed, from worthless to valuable, from certain of my future to lost in possibility. Just before sleep claimed me completely, I felt something warm settle over my body. His cloak, I realized distantly, the scent of pine and winter enveloping me as consciousness slipped away. Behind my closed eyelids, I thought I felt his gaze still upon me, watchful and considering in the darkness. I woke to the gentle rocking of the carriage and the soft glow of dawn filtering through the window. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember where I was or why. Then my eyes fell on the figure seated across from me, and everything rushed back with dizzying clarity. The Alpha King, Thorn, was awake and watching me, his posture relaxed, yet somehow still conveying absolute authority. He looked as though he hadn't slept at all, no signs of fatigue marking his harsh features. "You talk in your sleep," he said without preamble, his amber eyes assessing. Heat rushed to my cheeks. What did I say? Nothing intelligible. His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but passionate nonetheless. I straightened, realizing his cloak still draped over me like a blanket. The heavy fabric carried his scent, pine and winter, and something deeper that made my wolf stir beneath my skin. I folded it carefully, extending it toward him with hands I forced not to tremble. "Thank you," I said, proud that my voice remained steady. He accepted the cloak with a nod, our fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Even that fleeting contact sent a spark of awareness through me, a reaction I couldn't understand. My wolf had always been subdued, quiet, damaged like the rest of me, yet in his presence, she seemed to press closer to the surface, alert and interested in a way I'd never experienced. "We'll stop soon," he said, nodding toward the window. "There's a way station ahead where we can break our fast and stretch our legs." I followed his gaze to see a vast, misty landscape unfurling beyond the glass. Rolling hills covered in evergreens stretched toward distant mountains, nothing like the familiar, deciduous forests of my pack's territory. We had traveled farther in one night than I had been in my entire life. "Where are we?" I asked, unable to keep the wonder from my voice. "The borderlands between the Central and Northern Territories," he replied, something like satisfaction in his tone as he observed my reaction. "By nightfall, we'll reach the first of my pack's outposts." The carriage slowed, and I peered out to see a sturdy stone building emerging from the morning mist. Guards in the black and silver of the Northern Territory pack snapped to attention as our caravan approached. The efficiency of their movements spoke of rigorous training and absolute loyalty. When the carriage door opened, Thorn exited first, then turned and extended his hand to help me down. The gesture seemed almost courtly, at odds with the fearsome reputation that preceded him. I placed my fingers in his, acutely aware of the strength in his grip as he steadied me. The cool morning air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, fresh and invigorating after the confines of the carriage. I inhaled deeply, trying to calm my racing pulse as I took in our surroundings. The way station was more fortress than inn, with thick stone walls and narrow windows that spoke of defense rather than comfort. Alpha King, a tall, broad-shouldered man, approached, inclining his head in a show of respect that nonetheless lacked the subservience I'd seen in others. A beta, then, and one high in Thorn's trust. His eyes flickered to me with undisguised curiosity. "The station has been secured." "Thank you, Kieran," Thorn replied, his hand coming to rest at the small of my back in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "This is Alara. She is under my protection." Kieran's eyebrows rose slightly, but he masked his surprise quickly. "My lady," he said with a slight bow in my direction. "Welcome to the Northern Territories." The title felt foreign, uncomfortable, like clothing made for someone else's body. I nodded awkwardly, unsure of the proper protocol. In my pack, unmated females held little status. Here, claimed by the Alpha King, I entered a world of political nuance I was entirely unprepared for. Thorn guided me into the way station, his hand remaining at my back. Inside, a large hearth dominated the central room. a fire already crackling welcomingly. Servants moved efficiently, preparing a table with food while keeping their eyes respectfully lowered. "Eat," Thorn said, guiding me to the table. "We have a long journey ahead." The food was simple but hearty: fresh bread, cheese, smoked meats, and fruit. I realized I was ravenous, having eaten nothing since before the claiming ceremony. Still, I found myself picking at the food, too aware of Thorn's presence beside me, and the curious glances from his guards. "Is the food not to your liking?" Thorn asked, his voice low. "It's fine," I replied quickly. "I'm just adjusting." His eyes studied me for a long moment. "Adjusting," he repeated, as if testing the word. "Yes, I suppose you are." A commotion outside drew his attention. Through the window, I could see one of the guards arguing with a rider who had just arrived, dust still settling around his horse. "Excuse me," Thorn said, rising with fluid grace. "Kieran will see to your needs." As he strode outside, Kieran approached, taking the seat across from me that Thorn had vacated. Up close, I could see the scars that marked him as a warrior, one along his jawline, another disappearing beneath the collar of his tunic. "So," he said without preamble, "you're the one who caught his eye." I set down my cup carefully. "It seems so." "Interesting," Kieran mused, his gaze assessing rather than hostile. "He hasn't shown interest in any female since Lyria died." The name hung in the air between us. Thorn's first mate, the woman whose death had reportedly driven him to a vengeful fury that had reshaped the political landscape of all 5 territories. "I'm not replacing her," I said quietly, meeting Kieran's gaze directly. To my surprise, he laughed, a short bark of sound. "No one could," he agreed easily. "But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Lyria was complicated." Before I could ask what he meant, the door opened and Thorn returned, his expression thunderous. Kieran immediately rose, moving to intercept him. "News from the borderlands?" he asked, pitching his voice low, though not low enough that I couldn't hear. "Unrest in the western packs," Thorn replied tersely. "Rumors of alliance building against the northern territory." Kieran swore softly. "Ambrose? Who else?" Thorn's eyes flicked to me briefly before returning to his beta. "We need to move. Now. Take half the guard and ride ahead to alert the outpost. I want security doubled by the time we arrive." "And the girl?" Kieran asked, his voice neutral. "She stays with me," Thorn replied, his tone brooking no argument. Kieran nodded once and departed, barking orders to the gathered guards. Within minutes, the way station had transformed from peaceful rest stop to military operation, guards mounting horses and forming into squadrons with practiced efficiency. Thorn returned to my side, his expression grim. "We need to leave," he said, extending his hand to help me rise. "It's not safe to linger." "What's happening?" I asked, allowing him to guide me toward the door. "Politics," he replied grimly. "Something you'll need to learn quickly in your new position." Outside, the remaining guards had readied the carriages. To my surprise, Thorn led me not to the one we had traveled in previously, but to a smaller, lighter vehicle, with only a driver. "We'll travel faster this way," he explained, noting my confusion. "The larger caravan will continue as a decoy." The implications of his words sank in slowly. "Are we in danger?" His eyes met mine, hard and uncompromising. "Everyone associated with me is always in potential danger, Alara. It's the nature of power." He helped me into the carriage before following, his large frame making the space feel suddenly cramped. "But you're safer with me than anywhere else in the 5 territories." The carriage lurched into motion, moving at a much faster pace than our night journey. Thorn sat beside me rather than across, his body a wall of heat along my side. The proximity was unsettling, making it difficult to organize my thoughts. "Tell me about this Ambrose," I said finally, needing to break the tension. "The one causing unrest." Thorn's jaw tightened. "Alpha of the Western Pack, ambitious, ruthless, and convinced the Northern Territory has grown too powerful under my rule." "Has it?" I asked before I could stop myself. To my surprise, a brief smile ghosted across his lips. "Yes," he admitted without false modesty. "But power properly wielded brings stability, not tyranny. Ambrose doesn't understand the difference." "And is that why you came to our ceremony?" I asked, the pieces beginning to align in my mind. Political alliance building of your own? His gaze sharpened. You think I claimed you for political advantage? When I didn't answer, he laughed, the sound low and without humor. Your pack has no strategic value, Ilara. No resources I couldn't acquire elsewhere. No military strength worth mentioning. The dismissal of my pack stung, even as I recognized the truth in his assessment. Then why? I told you last night, he cut me off. When I have more to tell you, I will. We lapsed into silence, the rhythmic motion of the carriage and the tension of the morning conspiring to exhaust me despite having just woken. I found my eyelids growing heavy, my body swaying slightly with the movement of the vehicle. Rest, Thorn said, his voice gentler than I'd heard it before. We have hours yet to travel. I'm fine, I insisted, fighting against the pull of fatigue. Stubborn, he observed, but there was something like approval in his tone. Without warning, he shifted, drawing me against his side, my head coming to rest against his shoulder. Rest, he repeated, this time with the unmistakable timbre of an alpha command. My wolf responded instinctively, relaxing against him even as my human mind rebelled. The steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath my ear was oddly soothing, his warmth enveloping me like a cocoon of safety. I don't understand you, I murmured, sleep already tugging at the edges of my consciousness. No, he agreed, his voice a rumble I could feel through his chest. But you will. I woke sometime later to his voice, low and urgent, speaking to someone outside the carriage window. The vehicle had stopped, and the quality of light suggested late afternoon. How many? Thorn was asking, his body tense beside me. At least 20, came the reply. Kieran's voice, I realized. They've blocked the main road to the outpost. Armed? Heavily. And they're wearing Ambrose's colors. I sat up fully, sleep falling away in the face of potential danger. Thorn's expression was cold, calculating. All traces of the almost gentleness from earlier erased. Options? He asked. The old hunting trail, Kieran suggested. Narrow for the carriage, but passable. It would bypass their position entirely. Thorn nodded once. Make it happen. His eyes flicked to me, noting my alertness. We have a change of plans. The carriage lurched into motion again, this time moving off the smooth road and onto what felt like little more than a deer path. The ride became instantly rougher, branches occasionally scraping against the sides of the vehicle. Ambrose's men, I asked, piecing together the fragments of conversation I'd overheard. A welcoming party, Thorn confirmed, his voice tight with controlled anger. Not one I'm inclined to meet. What would they have done if they'd caught us? The question slipped out before I could reconsider the wisdom of asking. Thorn's gaze was steady, unflinching. Killed me, most likely. You. His jaw tightened. You would have been taken to Ambrose as proof of my death and a trophy of war. The cold calculation of it sent a shiver down my spine. Because I'm your claimed mate, yes. But we haven't completed the mating ceremony, I pointed out. The claiming is just preliminary. It's enough, he replied grimly. In the eyes of pack law, you're mine now. Harming you is an act of war against me personally, not just against the Northern Territory. The possessiveness in his voice stirred something deep within me, not fear, though perhaps it should have been, but a curious warmth that spread through my chest. In my entire life, no one had ever considered me worth fighting for. Now, suddenly, I was valuable enough that wars might be waged over me, not me, I reminded myself harshly. My position, the symbol I represented. The carriage hit a particularly deep rut, jolting us both. Thorn's arm shot out instinctively, steadying me before I could be thrown from my seat. His touch lingered, warm and solid against my waist. We'll reach the outpost by nightfall, he said, his voice rougher than before. You'll be safer there. And then? I asked, suddenly needing to understand what future awaited me beyond this journey. Then we continue to the heart of the north, he replied. My home. Where you will take your place as my claimed mate until the mating ceremony at the full moon. My hand found my grandmother's pendant, fingers tracing the familiar wooden curves. And after the ceremony, what then? He studied me for a long moment. those amber eyes seeming to see straight through to my core. "After the ceremony, you will be my mate in truth, the Luna of the Northern Territory. Second in power only to me." The magnitude of it washed over me like a wave, threatening to pull me under. From unwanted, infertile daughter to Luna of the most powerful territory in the 5 regions, the transition was too vast to comprehend. "I'm not prepared for this," I whispered, honesty forcing the words past my lips. "I know nothing of politics or leadership. In my pack, I was nothing." "Your pack," Thorn said, his voice hardening, "was blind to your value. That is their failing, not yours." "Of what value?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my tone. "I can't give you heirs. I can't strengthen bloodlines. What possible value could I have to an alpha king?" The carriage lurched to a sudden stop, nearly throwing me forward. Thorn caught me easily, his hands gripping my upper arms as he turned me to face him fully. "Look at me," he commanded, and my eyes rose to his automatically. "Your value is not measured by your womb, Alara. That your pack taught you otherwise speaks to their ignorance, not your worth." The echo of my grandmother's words in his mouth stole my breath. My fingers clutched the pendant harder, drawing his gaze to the movement. "What is that?" he asked, his tone gentling. "You hold it when you're afraid or uncertain." I hesitated, then slowly withdrew the pendant from beneath my dress, holding it in my palm for him to see. The carved wooden wolf gleamed softly in the fading light, worn smooth from years of being held. "My grandmother's," I explained. "She gave it to me before she died. She was the only one who," I swallowed hard, "who believed I had value beyond breeding." Thorn studied the pendant, then lifted his eyes to mine. Something flickered in their amber depths. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "She was right," he said simply, releasing my arms and settling back into his seat as the carriage began moving again. The rest of the journey passed in silence, but it was a different quality of silence than before. Not tense or awkward, but contemplative, as if we were both considering new possibilities in the space between us. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of fire, I caught my first glimpse of the outpost through the carriage window. Unlike the way station, this was a true fortress, stone walls rising imposingly against the darkening sky, watchtowers at each corner manned by alert guards, the black and silver banner of the Northern Territory snapping in the evening breeze. "Home for tonight," Thorn said, following my gaze. "Tomorrow, we continue to the heart of the North." The carriage passed through massive iron gates that closed behind us with an ominous clang. Inside, the fortress bustled with activity. Guards patrolling, servants hurrying about their duties, wolves in both human and shifted form moving with purpose. As our carriage came to a stop in the central courtyard, Kieran appeared, looking dusty but satisfied. "The border is secure," he reported as Thorn exited the carriage. "Ambrose's men have withdrawn to Western Territory lands. For now," Thorn replied grimly, before turning to help me down from the carriage. As my feet touched the cobblestones of the courtyard, the activity around us paused, all eyes turning in our direction. I felt the weight of their collective gaze, curious, assessing, judging, and fought the urge to shrink back into the shadows. Instead, I straightened my spine and lifted my chin, channeling a confidence I didn't feel. Beside me, I sensed rather than saw Thorn's approval. "My people," he addressed the gathered wolves, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard. "This is Alara, my claimed mate. She is to be afforded every respect and protection due to your future Luna." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Surprise, speculation, perhaps even disapproval, but no one dared voice it openly. One by one, they lowered themselves in gestures of respect, acknowledging their alpha's choice even if they didn't understand it. "Come," Thorn said, his hand finding the small of my back once more. "You must be exhausted." As he guided me across the courtyard toward the main keep, I felt the weight of expectations settling onto my shoulders like a heavy cloak. Whatever value Thorn saw in me, whatever purpose he had in claiming me, I would soon be expected to prove myself worthy of the position he had thrust upon me. The pendant lay warm against my skin, a reminder of my grandmother's faith in me. Your worth isn't in your womb, little one. Remember that when the world tries to tell you otherwise. For the first time since receiving those words, I began to believe they might be true. The chambers prepared for us were spacious and well-appointed, a stark contrast to the humble dwelling I'd left behind. A fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across rich tapestries depicting northern landscapes and hunting scenes. Servants had drawn a bath in an adjoining room, steam rising invitingly from the copper tub. Rest, bathe, change, Thorn instructed, his eyes sweeping the room with the practiced assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating security. I have matters to attend to with my commanders. I'll return for the evening meal. I nodded, relief and disappointment warring within me at the prospect of solitude. As much as I craved a moment to gather my scattered thoughts, a part of me was reluctant to see him go, as if his presence had become an anchor in the storm of change swirling around me. "Is there anything you need before I leave?" he asked, pausing at the door. Answers, I thought. Certainty. A reason to believe this isn't all some elaborate mistake. "No," I said instead, forcing a small smile. "Thank you." He studied me for a moment longer, as if weighing the truth of my words, before inclining his head slightly and departing. The heavy oak door closed behind him with a solid thud, leaving me truly alone for the first time since he had claimed me on the stone. I exhaled shakily, moving to the window that overlooked the fortress courtyard. Below, Thorn strode across the cobblestones, guards and soldiers stopping to bow as he passed. Power radiated from him, evident in every step, every gesture, every incline of his head. He was a king in truth, not just in title, commanding respect through strength rather than fear. And he had chosen me. The bath beckoned, and I surrendered to its promise of momentary peace. The hot water enveloped me like a blessing, soothing muscles I hadn't realized were tense from the long journey. I submerged fully, letting the water close over my head, muffling the sounds of the unfamiliar fortress. In that suspended moment, I could pretend that life hadn't irrevocably changed, that I wasn't suddenly thrust into a position I was woefully unprepared for. When I emerged, gasping softly, reality settled back around my shoulders. This was my life now. Whatever Thorn's reasons for claiming me, whatever future awaited in the heart of the North, there was no returning to what had been before. I dried myself and discovered clothing had been laid out while I bathed, a simple but elegant dress in deep forest green, far finer than anything I'd ever owned. It fit as if made for me, though I knew that was impossible given the haste of our departure. Thorn must have sent instructions ahead, preparing for my arrival even before he'd claimed me. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. How long had he been watching me? How long had I been part of a plan I knew nothing about? A soft knock at the door interrupted my spiraling thoughts. "Enter," I called, expecting a servant. Instead, a woman stepped into the room, tall and lean with silver streaking her dark hair. She carried herself with the confidence of someone comfortable in her own authority, her amber eyes, so similar to Thorn's, assessing me frankly. "So you're the one my son has chosen," she said without preamble, her voice rich and husky with age. Son. This, then, was the Dowager Luna of the Northern Territory, Thorn's mother. I dropped immediately into a deep curtsy, pulse racing. "Rise, child," she said, a hint of amusement coloring her tone. "I'm not here for formalities." I straightened slowly, acutely aware of my damp hair and simple appearance compared to her regal bearing. "My lady, I didn't know." "That I was here? Of course not." She moved further into the room, examining the space with the air of someone conducting an inspection. "Thorn wouldn't have mentioned me. He prefers to handle introductions on his own terms." She turned those penetrating amber eyes back to me. "But I've never been one to wait on my son's convenience, especially when it comes to matters of succession." The blunt reference to my presumed role made my cheeks heat. "My lady, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm Baron?" she supplied, one elegant eyebrow arching. "Yes, I know. News travels quickly, even from small isolated packs." The casual confirmation of my greatest shame from this stranger's lips stole my breath. She knew. She had known before I arrived, which meant, "Thorn knows as well," she confirmed, reading my expression. He's known since before he set foot in your pack's territory. My legs suddenly felt unable to support my weight. I sank onto the edge of the bed, mind racing. I don't understand. The Dowager Luna regarded me with an unreadable expression. No, I don't suppose you do. She moved to the window, looking out at the fortress grounds. My son has always been particular about his choices. Methodical. Nothing he does is without purpose. She turned back to face me, her expression softening slightly. The question you should be asking, child, is not why he chose you despite your perceived flaw, but whether that very thing might be precisely why he chose you. Before I could formulate a response to her cryptic statement, the door opened again, and Thorn himself entered. He stopped abruptly at the sight of his mother, his expression darkening. "Mother," he said, voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't aware you had arrived, clearly," she replied dryly. "I was just introducing myself to your claimed mate." The tension between them was palpable, complex in a way that spoke of long-standing disagreements, rather than simple discord. "And now you've done so," Thorn said, the dismissal clear in his tone. His mother smiled, seemingly unperturbed by his curtness. "Indeed I have." She turned to me, inclining her head slightly. "We'll speak again, Alara. Soon." With that, she swept from the room, leaving a charged silence in her wake. Thorn's jaw worked as he stared after her, emotions I couldn't decipher flickering across his face. "I apologize for my mother's directness," he said finally, turning back to me. "She has her own agenda, always." "She knows about me," I said quietly. "About my condition." "Yes. And so do you?" It wasn't a question. Thorn crossed to where I sat, lowering himself to one knee before me so that our eyes were level. The position, the Alpha King kneeling before me, was so unexpected that I found myself momentarily speechless. "Listen carefully, Alara, because I will only say this once," he said, his voice low and intense. "I did not claim you in ignorance or by mistake. I claimed you with full knowledge of who and what you are." "But why?" The question burst from me, weighted with all the confusion and insecurity of the past day. What possible value could a barren she-wolf have to the Alpha King? Something flashed in his eyes. Anger, frustration, perhaps even hurt. "Do you truly believe your only value lies in your ability to breed? Isn't that what our society teaches?" I countered, fingers finding my grandmother's pendant. "A she-wolf's purpose is to strengthen the pack through offspring. Without that, you are still intelligent, observant, and stronger than you know," he interrupted, his gaze never leaving mine. "You survived years of degradation without losing your sense of self. You face the unknown with courage rather than cowering. And your wolf—" He paused, something like wonder crossing his features. "Your wolf recognizes mine in a way I haven't experienced since—" He stopped abruptly, but I knew what he had been about to say. "Since Lyria. Since his first mate, whose death had left him ruling alone." "Is that it then?" I asked softly. "You sense some connection between our wolves?" "It's part of it," he acknowledged, rising to his feet and moving toward the hearth. "But not all." I waited, sensing there was more he wasn't ready to reveal. The fire cast his profile in sharp relief, highlighting the strong line of his jaw, the intensity of his focus as he stared into the flames. "There are political considerations as well," he admitted finally. "Things I'm not yet ready to discuss." Disappointment settled in my chest, though I'd expected as much. Of course there would be political motivations behind his choice. A man in his position couldn't afford decisions based solely on instinct or attraction. "I understand," I said, striving to keep my voice neutral. He turned back to me, eyes narrowing slightly. "Do you?" "You're the Alpha King," I replied simply. "Everything you do has consequences beyond yourself." A smile ghosted across his lips. "Already you understand more about leadership than many who have spent lifetimes in court." He crossed back to where I sat, extending his hand. "Come. It's time for the evening meal. My commanders are eager to meet you." I placed my hand in his, allowing him to draw me to my feet. "Will your mother be there?" "Unfortunately," he said dryly. Try not to let her intimidate you. It only encourages her." The hint of humor in his voice caught me by surprise, drawing a small smile from me. "I'll do my best." His eyes lingered on my face, something softening in his expression. "That dress suits you," he said, the unexpected compliment warming my cheeks. "Green brings out the gold in your eyes." Before I could formulate a response, he guided me toward the door, his hand settling at the small of my back in what was becoming a familiar gesture. The great hall was already filled with people when we entered, warriors, commanders, and what appeared to be local nobility, all rising to attention at Thorn's appearance. Conversations halted mid-sentence, all eyes turning to assess the Alpha King's unexpected claimed mate. I fought the urge to shrink beneath their scrutiny, forcing my spine straight and my chin high as Thorn led me to the head table. His mother was already seated there, watching our approach with those knowing amber eyes. "My Lord Alpha," a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face stepped forward, bowing deeply before straightening to appraise me with undisguised curiosity. "This is your claimed mate, Ilara," Thorn supplied, his tone making it clear that her name was to be used with respect. "Ilara, this is Commander Vask, head of my border forces." "My lady," Vask said, inclining his head to me. "Welcome to the Northern Territory." Others approached, offering similar greetings, names and titles blurring together in a whirl of new faces and thinly veiled assessment. I did my best to respond appropriately, acutely aware that my every word and gesture were being judged. As we took our seats at the head table, Thorn leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. "You're doing well," he murmured, the quiet praise steadying me more than I would have expected. The meal progressed with formal conversation about border patrols and security measures, carefully avoiding direct mention of Ambrose or the Western Territory threat. I remained mostly silent, listening and observing the dynamics at play. It became clear that while Thorn held absolute authority, he valued the counsel of his commanders, allowing them to speak freely before making decisions. "And what do you think, my lady?" Vask asked suddenly, directing a question to me about the allocation of resources to border villages. I froze momentarily, caught off guard by being addressed directly on a matter of governance. Across the table, Thorn's mother watched with keen interest, waiting to see how I would respond. Taking a steadying breath, I considered what I had observed in my own pack's territory. Border villages are often the first to suffer in times of conflict, but the last to receive aid, I said carefully. They need not just protection, but investment, reasons to remain loyal when tested. A surprised silence followed my words, before Vask nodded slowly. "Well reasoned, my lady." I caught Thorn's approving glance, a subtle nod that sent warmth spreading through my chest. Perhaps I wasn't as unprepared as I'd feared. As the meal concluded, Thorn rose, signaling an end to formal proceedings. Guards took positions near the doors as most of the gathering dispersed, leaving only Thorn's inner circle at the head table. "Now," he said, his voice dropping to a register that commanded immediate attention. "The real discussion begins." Maps were produced, unrolled across the cleared table. I recognized the 5 territories marked in different colors, the Northern Territory largest of all, spanning nearly half the known lands. "Ambrose has been building alliances for months," Kieran reported, pointing to areas marked with small X's. "Southern pack leaders meeting in secret, Eastern diplomatic envoys crossing Western lands. He means to unite them against us," Thorn concluded, his expression grim. "Against you," his mother corrected, speaking for the first time since the meal began. "It's personal, not just political. Ambrose has never forgotten that you took his sister as your first mate, then failed to protect her." The blunt statement sent a shock through me. Lyria had been Ambrose's sister? This wasn't just political rivalry, but family vendetta? Thorn's face hardened to granite. Lyria chose me, not the match her brother arranged. Ambrose never forgave either of us for that. "And now he sees your new claimed mate as an opportunity," his mother continued, her gaze shifting to me with unnerving intensity. "A statement of intent." "A statement of what?" I asked, unable to remain silent in a conversation so directly about me. Thorn's mother smiled, though there was little warmth in it. "By claiming a she-wolf known to be barren, my son has made a declaration that he is not seeking heirs. that his chosen successor remains as planned. I turned to Thorn, confusion plain on my face. Your successor? But I thought... My nephew, Thorn supplied, his jaw tight. Lyria's son from her first mating. He survived the attack that killed his mother. He is being raised in secret, protected from those who would use him as a pawn against me. The revelation stole my breath. Thorn already had an heir, not his by blood, but by choice and responsibility. He was protecting his dead mate's child, raising him as successor despite no biological connection. Ambrose believes the boy should be under his control as bloodkin, Kieran explained, his voice pitched low. He sees the Alpha King's guardianship as theft of his bloodline's right to power. So by claiming me, I began, pieces falling into place. By claiming a mate who cannot bear children, I've made it clear that my succession plans remain unchanged, Thorn confirmed. That Lyria's son will inherit the Northern Territory, not any future offspring of mine. The political calculation behind his choice of me suddenly crystallized with painful clarity. I wasn't chosen for any special quality or connection, but for what I lacked, the ability to complicate the succession with competing heirs. I fought to keep my expression neutral, to hide the hurt that lanced through me at this cold confirmation of my utility. All his talk of my value beyond breeding had been just that. Talk, designed to secure my cooperation in his political strategy. You'll understand, of course, why this information cannot leave this room, Thorn's mother said, her eyes still fixed on me. The boy's existence remains our most closely guarded secret. I nodded mechanically, mind still reeling from the revelations. Of course. The discussion continued around me, strategies and contingencies debated in low, urgent tones, but I found it increasingly difficult to focus. The day's events, the emotional whiplash of going from unwanted burden to political asset, and now this final understanding of my true purpose, it all pressed down upon me until I felt I might shatter beneath the weight. Thorn must have noticed my pallor, for he abruptly called an end to the council. Enough for tonight. We depart at first light for the heart of the North. Rest while you can. As the others filed out, he turned to me, concern evident in the slight furrow of his brow. You're tired. I'll escort you back to our chambers. Our chambers. The casual possessive sent another wave of confusion through me. If I was merely a political statement, why the pretense of true mating? Why share chambers at all? We walked in silence through the fortress corridors, the weight of unspoken questions hanging between us. When we reached the room, I moved immediately to the window, needing space to order my thoughts. You're upset, Thorn observed, closing the door behind us. I'm processing, I corrected, keeping my back to him. It's been an illuminating evening. He moved to stand behind me, close enough that I could feel his heat but not touching. You feel used. The direct assessment startled a harsh laugh from me. Isn't that exactly what's happening? You chose me not for who I am, but for what I lack. For the political message my barrenness sends to your enemies. That is one aspect of why I chose you, he acknowledged, his voice steady. Not the only reason, and not even the most important one. I turned to face him, arms crossed protectively over my chest. Then what is the most important reason? Because from where I stand, it seems I've gone from being worthless in one pack to being valuable for my worthlessness in another. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes, a glimpse of the predator beneath the controlled exterior. Do not put words in my mouth, Alara. I have never once called you worthless. You didn't have to, I replied, years of accumulated hurt lending sharpness to my words. Your actions speak clearly enough. You need a mate who cannot bear children. I fit that requirement. It's a convenient political arrangement. Nothing more. He moved then, closing the distance between us with predatory grace. His hands came up to frame my face. Not roughly, but with a firmness that brooked no escape. You think I would claim a mate, any mate, for mere political convenience? He asked, his voice dropping to a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. That I would bind myself to a woman I didn't want, didn't desire, didn't choose with every part of my being? His words sent heat cascading through me, pooling low in my belly. I don't know what to think anymore. Then let me make it perfectly clear, he said, his thumbs brushing over my cheekbones in a gesture that felt startlingly tender from such a powerful man. Yes, your inability to bear children serves a political purpose. It protects my nephew's position and prevents Ambrose from claiming I seek to erase his sister's bloodline from succession. His eyes held mine, amber depths burning with an intensity that stole my breath. But I could have achieved the same ends by claiming any number of barren she-wolves, or by simply declaring my intentions publicly. I chose you, Alara, because from the moment I caught your scent, my wolf recognized something in you that called to the very core of who I am. What? I whispered, hardly daring to believe what he seemed to be saying. A match, he said simply. Not a replacement for what was lost, but something new, something that could be even stronger, given time and trust. His hands slid from my face to my shoulders, down my arms to capture my hands in his. I don't expect you to believe me yet. Words are easy, and you've had too many lies in your life already. But I am not your parents, Alara. I do not value you only for what your body can or cannot do. He lifted one of my hands, pressing it flat against his chest, where his heart beat strong and steady beneath my palm. I value you for this, the courage that beats in your heart despite years of being told you are less, the strength that kept you standing tall even when your pack would have seen you bow, the intelligence that observes and understands more than you reveal. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, emotion welling up too powerful to contain. Why me? I asked again, needing to hear it, to believe that this wasn't just another form of manipulation. Because when I walked into that clearing and saw you standing alone on that stone, everything in me recognized everything in you, he said, his voice rough with emotion I hadn't believed him capable of. The loneliness, the determination, the fierce, wounded pride. I saw myself as I was after Lyria died. Hollow but standing, broken but unbowed, he released one of my hands to brush away a tear that had escaped down my cheek. I claimed you because I couldn't walk away. Because something in me knew that if I left that clearing without you, I would regret it for the rest of my days. The raw honesty in his voice, in his eyes, broke something open inside me, a dam I'd built against hope, against believing I could ever be truly wanted for myself alone. I don't know how to be what you need, I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. A Luna. A political partner. I faltered, unable to say the word. Mate, he supplied gently. And you don't need to know yet. We have time, Alara. Time to learn each other, to build trust, to see if what my wolf recognized in you is something your wolf recognizes in return. His thumb brushed across my lower lip, the touch sending sparks of awareness cascading through me. I don't expect love from you, not yet. But I do ask for your trust, or at least the chance to earn it. My hand still rested against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart beneath my palm. This close, his scent enveloped me, pine and winter and something uniquely his that called to something deep within me. My wolf stirred, pressing close to the surface of my consciousness in a way she never had before, drawn to the power and protection he offered. I can try, I whispered, the words feeling like both surrender and a new beginning. The smile that curved his lips transformed his face, softening the harsh planes and revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the Alpha King's mantle. That's all I ask, for now. He stepped back slightly, creating space between us, though his hand remained holding mine. We should rest. The journey to the heart of the North begins early, and it will be your first glimpse of your new home. Home. The word echoed in my mind, carrying with it a tentative hope I scarcely dared acknowledge. Not just a place of residence, but somewhere I might truly belong, not despite my perceived brokenness, but accepted wholly as I was. As Thorn moved to bank the fire for the night, I touched my grandmother's pendant, feeling its familiar contours beneath my fingers. Your worth isn't in your womb, little one, her voice whispered in my memory. Remember that, when the world tries to tell you otherwise. For the first time, standing in the chamber I shared with the Alpha King, who had claimed me knowing full well what others saw as my greatest flaw, I truly believed those words might be true. Whatever came next, The journey to the heart of the North, the inevitable political machinations of Ambrose, the challenges of becoming Luna to a people who would scrutinize my every move. I would face it with the knowledge that I had been chosen. Not for what I could produce, but for who I was. It was, perhaps, the most precious gift I had ever received. Thorn turned back to me, his amber eyes reflecting the dying firelight. Tomorrow begins our real journey, Ilara. Together, I said, the word half question, half statement. He nodded, his expression solemn but his eyes warm. Together. And for the first time in my life, that simple word felt like a promise I could believe in.